Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever.
Chapter 1. From Village Boy to Dreamer. In the rolling hills of the eastern Cape of South Africa, in a small village called Mavezo, a child was born on July 18th, 1918. His name was Rolihlahla Mandela, a Xhosa word that loosely translates to pulling the branch of a tree, or as some would later say, troublemaker. At the time, no one could have imagined that this boy from such humble beginnings would one day grow into a man who would shake the very foundations of injustice and inspire the entire world. Rolihlahla was born into the Thembu royal family. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa, was a respected local chief and counselor to the king. From his father and the elders, young Mandela absorbed the rhythms of leadership, how a leader listened more than he spoke, how decisions were made by consensus, and how dignity mattered even in the face of hardship. But life was not easy. The family lived modestly, often relying on crops, livestock, and the tight bonds of community. When Mandela was just a boy, his father lost his position with the local chief due to a dispute with the colonial authorities. The family faced hardship, and not long after, his father passed away. This loss deeply affected Mandela, but it also led him to be taken under the care of Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. Moving into the regent's household opened a new world for him, one where discipline, education, and the duties of leadership were ever present. Like most children in his village, Mandela spent his early days herding cattle, running barefoot through fields, and listening to fireside stories of warriors who fought bravely for their land. These tales planted seeds in his heart, stories of resistance and resilience that would guide him years later. He was curious, observant, and thoughtful, often pausing to question why life was the way it was. When he reached school age, a missionary teacher gave him an English name, a common practice under colonial rule. That was the day Rolihlahla became known as Nelson. At first it seemed a small change, just a name for school records, but it symbolized something larger. The world was already shaping him in ways beyond his control. Still, Mandela carried both names with pride, one rooted in his heritage, the other connecting him to a wider, changing world. At school, Mandela discovered his love for learning. He was not the loudest in the classroom, nor the fastest, but he was disciplined and determined. Mathematics and history fascinated him, and he devoured books that spoke of distant lands, heroes, and freedom. Yet outside the classroom, he could not escape the reality of his country. South Africa was deeply divided by a system of racial segregation that treated black people as inferior in their own land. Even as a child, Mandela felt the sting of injustice, though he could not yet name it. As he grew older, his sense of questioning grew stronger. Why were white children given privileges that black children were denied? Why did colonial laws strip his people of their rights? Why was dignity determined by skin color? These silent questions stirred in him, shaping his sense of justice. When Mandela reached his teenage years, the regent arranged for him to attend a higher mission school, and later Heald Town, a respected institution for black students. There he was introduced to Western ideas of freedom, equality, and democracy. He read about leaders and revolutionaries from around the world, and though he was still quiet and reserved, a fire had begun to burn inside him. But Mandela's life was not without tension. The regent, following tradition, expected him to marry a young woman chosen for him and settle into a life of rural leadership. Mandela, however, had other dreams. He longed to see the world beyond the hills of the Eastern Cape. He wanted an education, independence, and a chance to define his own path. In a bold decision, Mandela and his cousin ran away to Johannesburg. It was a journey that would change the course of his life forever. Johannesburg was unlike anything he had ever known, a bustling city of opportunities and sharp inequalities. Here Mandela saw up close the harsh realities of apartheid, a system that kept his people in poverty and submission. But in this city, he also found inspiration, mentors, and the chance to chase the education that would shape his destiny. From a barefoot boy in Mvezo to a determined young man in Johannesburg, Mandela's journey in this first chapter of life was one of growth, loss, and discovery. He carried with him the lessons of his father and the stories of his ancestors, but also a restless desire to fight for something greater. He was still just a dreamer then, but his dreams were no longer small. They stretched far beyond the cattle fields of his childhood, reaching into the heart of a nation that desperately needed change.
And so began the making of Nelson Mandela, the boy who would not accept the limits placed upon him, and the dreamer who would one day transform into the leader of a people. Chapter 2. The Struggle for Freedom. When Nelson Mandela arrived in Johannesburg as a young man, he was wide-eyed, hopeful, and determined to carve a new future. The bustling city was filled with noise, hardship, and sharp inequality. It was here that Mandela began to see apartheid for what it truly was, not just an unfair policy, but a deliberate system of oppression designed to strip his people of dignity, land, and hope. Johannesburg did not only give him work and education, it gave him purpose. Mandela enrolled at the University of Witwatersrand, where he studied law and mixed with students of all races. Though he often felt isolated as one of the few black students, he also found his voice there. He began reading about leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, whose philosophy of nonviolent resistance deeply impressed him. Gandhi had once lived in South Africa, and his teachings on peaceful defiance against injustice resonated in Mandela's heart. It was around this time that Mandela became involved with the African National Congress, the ANC, a political organization fighting for the rights of black South Africans. But Mandela and other young activists felt the movement needed fresh energy. In 1944, together with friends like Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, he helped found the ANC Youth League. They were young, bold, and determined to make the struggle more aggressive, more urgent. Their motto was clear: freedom in our lifetime. At the same time, Mandela's personal life was changing. That same year, he married Evelyn Ntoko Mace, with whom he would have 4 children. But his role as husband and father was constantly challenged by his growing commitment to the movement. Activism demanded long nights, endless meetings, and the constant threat of arrest. Mandela often struggled to balance family responsibilities with the call of freedom, and the strain grew heavier with each passing year. By day, Mandela worked as a lawyer with Oliver Tambo. Together, they opened the first black-owned law firm in Johannesburg, offering affordable legal help to those who were powerless against unjust laws. Their tiny office was always crowded with workers, farmers, and families facing eviction, harassment, or police brutality. For Mandela, the law was not just a profession, It was a weapon to defend the weak. Still, the apartheid system grew harsher. In 1952, the ANC launched the Defiance Campaign, a movement of peaceful resistance against unjust laws. Inspired by Gandhi, Mandela encouraged volunteers to break laws openly and willingly face arrest. He himself stood at the front lines, risking his career and freedom. His courage made him a rising leader, but it also drew the full attention of the government. The turning point came in 1960 in a small town called Sharpeville. On that day, police opened fire on a peaceful protest, killing 69 men and women, many shot in the back as they fled. The massacre shook Mandela to his core. For years, he had believed in peaceful resistance, but Sharpeville made him realize the regime would not surrender power through kindness or negotiation alone. The government banned the ANC, and Mandela, once a public leader, was forced underground. It was during these dangerous years that Mandela's marriage to Evelyn fell apart under the strain of his political life. Later, he would marry Winnie Madikizela, who would stand beside him through some of his darkest days. But Mandela's life was no longer his own. He became a man on the run, moving secretly from safe house to safe house, disguising himself as a driver, a gardener, even a chef. The press gave him a name, the Black Pimpernel, because he always seemed to vanish before the police could catch him. In 1961, Mandela helped found Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. Though violence was never his first choice, he believed it had become necessary to sabotage government structures, not to harm lives, but to show the regime that black South Africans would not submit forever.
Eventually, the government caught up with him. In 1962, Mandela was arrested and charged with conspiracy and sabotage. His trial became world famous, not because of the charges, but because of his words. Standing in the courtroom, Mandela delivered a speech that shook history. With calm defiance, he declared, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. He was sent to Robben Island, a bleak prison surrounded by the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. For years he toiled in the limestone quarries, cut off from his family, with little more than letters and occasional visits to keep hope alive. Yet behind bars, Mandela did not fade into silence. Instead, he grew stronger. His dignity, resilience, and leadership turned him into a symbol not just for South Africa, but for the entire world. The boy from Mvezo was now a prisoner on an island, but to millions, he had become something far greater, a living reminder that freedom, once dreamed of, cannot be silenced. Chapter 3. The Father of a Nation. For 27 long years, Nelson Mandela's life was defined by the cold walls of prison. Robben Island, with its harsh winds and endless stone quarries, was meant to break him. But instead it shaped him. Behind those bars, Mandela learned patience, discipline, and, above all, the strength of forgiveness. The world outside had changed dramatically during those decades, yet the call for his release only grew louder. Songs were sung in his name, marches were carried out across continents, and posters with his face became symbols of hope. Mandela, the prisoner, had already become Mandela, the legend. In February 1990, that legend walked free. On the 11th of that month, the gates of Victor Verster prison opened, and Mandela stepped out, tall and dignified, holding Winnie's hand. The image of him raising his fist in victory was broadcast around the world, a moment etched forever in history. Crowds cheered, tears streamed down faces, and South Africa held its breath. Mandela was free, but his greatest test had only just begun. The nation he returned to was torn apart by hatred, violence, and mistrust. Decades of apartheid had left the scars that seemed impossible to heal. Yet Mandela chose not to seek revenge. Instead, he preached reconciliation. "Let bygones be bygones," he said. He urged black South Africans to forgive their oppressors, and he called on white South Africans to abandon fear and join hands in building a new country. It was a radical message, and not everyone believed it could work. But Mandela's calm presence and unwavering vision slowly began to turn enemies into partners. In 1994, the impossible became reality. South Africa held its first democratic elections, and millions of people of all races stood in long lines to cast their votes. When the results came in, Nelson Mandela was chosen as the nation's first black president. The boy from the tiny village of Maveso, who once herded cattle and studied by candlelight, was now the leader of a free South Africa. The joy was overwhelming. People danced in the streets, strangers hugged each other, and the weight of centuries seemed to lift. As president, Mandela faced enormous challenges: poverty, inequality, crime, and a nation deeply divided. Yet his leadership was marked not by anger, but by compassion. He understood that true freedom was not just political, but also emotional, the ability to live without bitterness. In one of his most powerful acts, he invited his former prison guards to his inauguration, showing the world that forgiveness was stronger than vengeance. One of his most famous moments came during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Rugby had long been seen as a sport of the white minority, but Mandela wore the green jersey of the Springboks and walked onto the field to greet the players. His gesture turned a symbol of division into a symbol of unity, and when South Africa won, the entire nation celebrated as one. It was a moment of healing, a reminder that Mandela's strength lay not just in politics, but in his ability to touch hearts. After serving one term, Mandela stepped down from the presidency in 1999, proving once again his humility and his belief in democracy. But his work was far from over. In his later years, he became a global advocate for peace, education, and health. He spoke out against poverty and inequality wherever he saw it. He launched campaigns to fight HIV/AIDS, famously declaring, "AIDS is no longer just a disease, it is a human rights issue." Even in retirement, Mandela remained a voice of conscience for the world. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95. The world mourned as one. From South Africa's townships to the halls of the United Nations, candles were lit, songs were sung, and tears were shed for the man who had given so much. But amid the grief, there was also gratitude for his courage, his sacrifices, and his example of forgiveness. Mandela's story is more than history. It is a lesson. He taught us that strength is not found in anger, but in compassion. That leadership is not about power, but about service. And that true freedom comes not from defeating others, but from embracing them as equals. Today, statues of Mandela stand tall across the world. His words are quoted by leaders, teachers, and children alike. His life remains a reminder that no matter how dark the night, hope can always rise. Nelson Mandela, the prisoner, the president, the peacemaker, left behind more than a legacy. He left the world a timeless truth, that forgiveness has the power to heal. Resilience can change history, and love for humanity is the greatest gift of all.